We are in AP Lit, and I'm just giving back the romantic literature test. They're looking at them. And I also promise you, I haven't forgotten about the poems. That's on my list this week. I'd like to be able to do a lot of this week, tomorrow, and maybe over the weekend. So when we come back, your grade will be more accurate. So you got 2 more quizzes to go on there that you've already done, quiz grades, plus you've got a paper that will be a test, and possibly a 3rd one if we work it in. I don't know if we're going to need it. I'm going to let you keep those. So when you get the review next week, some of that will be on it. The review is different. The test is different. It'll be short. It'll be an hour, a little over an hour long. The oral part of it will be 3 minutes plus. And I'm just going to give you a sheet of topics on Monday. And Bureau pros and 9th graders, we have to hold their hands a lot. But with the 11th, with you guys, I don't, but we certainly entertain questions. So we'll have that week, and then the week afterwards, we'll be writing that paper that week following. So that'll, of course, go in this quarter. So just make sure that you're going to be getting a review sheet in a week. That'll give you 2 weeks, literally 2 weeks from Monday, I think, is the oral exam. 3 weeks from today is the oral exam. Aren't you all first? Have you seen that? Because they switched it. The 9th graders were going to be first, but instead it's going to be you guys. Yeah.
So are we going to have another test this quarter?
Yes. The paper on All the King's Men, plus possibly a 3rd one, because we do have 2 weeks after Christmas. We can put a test in.
Okay.
That won't be on the exam.
Is the quiz, or is the poem a quiz or a test?
It's a quiz. I might count it twice. Sometimes I've done that. Yeah.
Oh, wait, first of all, which poem were you talking about?
The one you wrote.
Oh, the sonnet. Okay, and the test on All the King's Men?
It's the paper.
Is it like something you write in class?
Yeah, it'll be another paper like we wrote in class.
So like the one we wrote on the crucible?
Right. All right, so another thing I like to get, I'll give you some credit for this since I've given you time to do it. Would you get out that list? I asked you to make a list of books that you have read that impacted you, or that you would like to read, not or, and that you would like to read. And I will take a minute and come around. You'll just show me that list, I'll give you a little credit. I'd like to go around the room and give you this opportunity, but include one of the books at least on the list that you want to read. I think that's maybe the more important list. Thank you.
Communist Manifesto.
I was going to put the Communist Manifesto, but I was going to do.
Should I go with that or Mein Kampf?
I wouldn't say annotate.
They are.
But, I mean, it's right here.
What are your other options?
They're both books on the time.
But no, what are your other 5?
Just Dr. Talmadge's books, the Bible, again.
I don't know why.
Did you get the Hunger Games?
I actually enjoyed them. Like, I actually like.
Yeah, I get 70 something after I walked into the woods.
It's 6%
Just to keep up with it, I don't know if you're familiar, see how we do it, but Clay, why don't you start? Just briefly tell us about the book or books that meant something to you, maybe a book or two that you'd like to read.
So, the Harry Potter series and the Percy Jackson series are probably my two favorite series out of the ones I've read, because they were kind of the first books that introduced me to reading when I was in like elementary school. And the books I want to read, probably number 1 and 2 are Hitler's book Mein Kampf. I would probably like to look over the Communist Manifesto, and I would like to read through Dr. Talbert's book, because I thought that would be pretty interesting.
You
There's
know,
the saving
in high
grace.
school,
The life of
Clay, I
What's it
read
say?
Mein Kampf. And
Yeah, this book,
it was interesting, you know, you realize who you're dealing with, there might be illusions, but.
Is it My Struggle? Is that what it means?
Yes, yeah, it was fascinating, so anyway,
I mean, I wrote Black
I
Out.
commend your list, yeah.
So
All right, let's listen, Patty.
I was a fan of the Dire to Wimpy Kids series.
Good.
They're just fantastic, like they were.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
I just read them all the time, and that's how I started reading. Book I wanna read, 101 Ways to Help Teen Anxiety. I was supposed to read it years ago and I never did, so I'm supposed to read that, yeah.
Good. Yeah, Becca.
A book I read was A Diary of a Young Girl. By Anne Frank.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting and it was really sad.
Yeah.
And then a book I want to read, I said either Jane Eyre or The Handmaid's Tale. They both seem interesting.
And of course you could say, and,
Yeah.
Jane Eyre, you got plenty of time. Yeah, thanks. Ellen.
One of the books that impacted me is The Screwtape Letters. I really like that book, and it's one of the first books I read by C.S. Lewis. And then, books that, well, besides like his fiction, or the Narnia series. And then the books that I want to read is either Animal Farm, actually, or Heretics by G.K. Chesterton.
Oh, yeah, that would be on my list. What's the name of the book by Chester? Maybe one his most famous one,
G.K. Chesterton.
Orthodox. I actually started it and I didn't finish it. I wasn't because it wasn't interesting. It's just something intervened. So you said that. How many books by Lewis have you read?
I've read Screwtape, I've read The Four Loves, one of the, all of the Narnia series, one of the,
Nonfiction.
sci-fi, yeah, and what are his other?
We read The Great Divorce.
The Great Divorce, Mere Christianity, The Hideous Strength.
I would say Animal Farm you could read before you could finish it before you went to bed. I mean, it's that short, so whenever you decide to read it. I
Animal Farm was
think-
written by C.S. Lewis.
What?
Oh, I thought you were.
Oh, yeah, she mentioned Animal Farm,
Oh.
is one you wanted to read. Yes.
Alright, so in sixth grade, we did like this book club thing. And this is a book I didn't really want to read because I thought it sounded like sad, but my people I was in the book club with picked it, so it was called The City of Orphans. And honestly, I really liked this book because it was like one of those books that like, the storyline was so good, like it's hard to put down.
Yeah.
And at like that time, I wasn't really
Is it
big on.
fiction?
Yeah, I wasn't really big on reading, so, yeah, I really liked that book. And then a book I wanna read is Think and Grow Rich, cause my parents are advising me to read that.
I think I need to read that book.
What?
Think and Grow Rich.
Oh.
Thank you, Parker.
One of the books that I've read was, well, I said Les Miserables. Just that, like, well, out of all the books I've read, that one's like the best one probably, because I don't really read that many books that like deep into just actions and consequences and just the morals of people.
Sure.
And book that I want to read, I guess, would, The Dune. Nathan's reading it right now.
That was one time on my list, I think I mentioned it, I never had yet to read it. All right, thank you, I'll put it back on the list, yes.
So, I have a favorite book, it's Pride and Prejudice, I read it 4 times. It's
Wow.
One of my favorite books.
Really?
It's so good.
Really?
Yes, I have.
Wow.
It's very good read. Really.
I'm impressed.
Yeah, well, I read it in like middle school, like once, and then I read it for a book club one time, yeah, we just have some, anyway. And then a book I want to read is The Book Thief.
Oh, The Book Thief, I've heard, I think there was a movie.
I've seen the movie.
I think I saw the movie.
I wanna read the book,
Yeah.
yeah, it's really sad.
Yeah, I've heard that it was a good book.
Pride and
Probably better
Prejudice
than the
sounds
movie.
like a spin-off, or it seems like a spin-off of Little Women. That
Pride and Prejudice?
Yeah.
Did you
Is
finish
it-
Les Mis, Parker?
The Little Women. No,
Did
the
you
Little
finish
Women.
Les
I
Mis?
guess.
Pride and
What?
Prejudice
That's the
was
better
first.
Oh, the Little Women thing? No, I just seen the movie.
No, I said, did you finish Les Mis?
Yeah. No.
What is it about? Parker, what is it about?
It's about Les Mis. I'm just kidding, I know.
Okay, then what is it?
Jean, not
Okay,
Jean.
okay, you're fast.
You got the rest of your life to finish it. This way you can take it
COVID
with you.
hit. I was gonna finish
All right,
it.
but-
I wrote
Yeah.
that one of the most influential was The Odyssey by Homer, because I really enjoyed how it was able to kind of blur the line between history and fiction.
Yeah.
And it was able to do it better than your average historical fiction novel. And one of the ones I want to read was, let me see if I can find it. I want to read some of the famous Stephen King novels, because I enjoy horror movies, and I want to read the source material.
The what?
The source material.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Not
Yeah, Michelle.
One of the books that I read that made an impact is called The Wilderness Family, and it's about a family who moves to Africa, and I really liked it because, it shows more of the realistic side of it, because the majority of mission trip books that I've read before kind of over romanticize
Oh.
it, and tend to
Well, you've
show-
been there, so you know, you know what it's like to live on the mission field.
Yeah, so it tends to make it a little seem better than it can be. And then a book I want to read is Jane Eyre.
Yeah, I never taught Jane Eyre, but I have read it. I read it because I was on a list of mine, that I think I wanna read this, and I really enjoyed it. I liked it better than Wuthering Heights, I don't know why. Her sister wrote Wuthering Heights. I don't remember much about Wuthering Heights. David?
So, I liked Pilgrim's Progress, and while we read it last year for the summer reading, but we're only supposed to read halfway through, but I read all of it because I liked it a lot, and I liked all the illusions.
Which book?
Did you read a update, modern version of it? You ought to read the other, it's also, if you like it enough to read it again, the original, more time period English, it was really pretty. Rollins.
Oh, me, oh.
But I want to read the fiction.
Okay, so I think one of the most influential books was, I really liked The Hiding Place, when we read that in 6th grade. I just liked her account of everything that went on. And then a book that I want to read, Alice actually read it.
Hang on, listen to her.
Is the Screwtape Letters, so.
Yeah, that's really good.
Corey Ten Boom.
I read that in high school.
And it has the red cover.
Oh, yeah, that was a
It's like
really
leather. She
I'm
liked
not asking about the book, I'm saying what the summary is.
Oh, like,
She said The Hiding Place, and, what was the one you wanted to read? All right, guys, give us a couple more minutes here.
So, a book
I can't hear you.
A book I have read was, I read the Bible once, no one's mentioned it yet, so.
Have you read all of it?
Yeah.
Wow, you hear that?
Let's
I
go.
really-
Yes!
I
I
really.
read the Bible, I want to read the Bible.
Dave, now the next thing you need to do is read it again.
Yeah.
So that's
backwards.
You wait,
want
did
to
you say
read
you
it?
only read the Bible once?
You want,
Revelations to Genesis.
you've read the Bible and you want to.
All right, go ahead. That's really, I'm impressed. That's
Yeah,
very
okay,
good.
and so the book I want to read was the Screw Tape Letters.
But that's not all that long either. Of course, C.S. Lewis, you gotta really think about that, but that's really good. Thank you, Keith.
I watch.
Two books that impacted me would be the Percy Jackson series, because that was like the first book that got me into reading, and then,
Taught me how to read.
and then Mere Christianity, because that was just a really good book. It
Yeah.
challenged my way of thinking. And then a book that I want to read is Receiving Second Thessalonians by Dr. Talbert, and The Way of Kings, which is a book that Kieran recommended me.
Yeah, who did?
Kieran.
Really? The Way of King? I don't know anything about it. It seems like
You should
I
ask
should.
him about it.
What?
You should ask him.
I will. I'll
Have you
see
read
it.
Dr. Talbert's
You go
book?
to Books and Noble, you see.
No, I haven't. He hasn't given me one.
It is though.
Yes.
One of the books that impacted me was The Great Divorce, because it was the first academic book that I actually liked. And then a book that I want to read is The Song of Roland.
I hope you're gonna say again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your list.
I did not feel
I think
that
I've told
in
you,
honesty.
I told you this before, somewhere on my list is over here, but I remember reading 3 books at Carolina, that really made me, like, and I've never reread them. It's interesting. I've talked to other people who, in their favorite books list, they didn't reread them. And I'm afraid to reread it, and it's because I don't want to miss, it's like that first experience, I don't want it to change. Brothers Karamazov, I mentioned that, Dostoevsky. Look Homeward Angel, all these were in college, that was for a class. Look Homeward Angel, friend, told me I should read it. And The Technological Society by Jacques Ellul. As strange as it sounds, it was small print, 300 pages. It just struck a nerve with me. It was about culture. And it's the first book about culture, like what's wrong with culture. And it fascinated me. And I've never reread that. I really don't have a desire to. I picked up both Brothers Karamazov and Look Homeward Angel to read it again. And it didn't have the same effect, that it did 50 years ago almost, literally. What would I like to read? Patrick O'Brien is a favorite author of mine. He writes about the sea and the naval wars during the Napoleonic. I'm on number 5 or 6. He wrote 20. I'll never read them all, but I want to read them in order, so that's on the list. Several of the ones that you mentioned. I think I mentioned, and I'm definitely going to read this. My college professor suggested I read Adventures of Ideas. I'm trying to remember, he was a 20th century philosopher, probably an atheist, and I was a Christian at the time, and this guy I don't know if he was a Christian or not, but I bought it, or actually somebody bought it for me, old book, and so that's still on my list. The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, the famous book on that, I would like to read that. I've read part of it. It's one of these big books, but I've read it, and I'm sure there's some others, but it's fun to have a list, just like you actively carry this list around you and say, that's a book. You don't have to have anybody the rest of your life tell you what to read, because we've done our job. We've encouraged you to read certain books that several of you even acknowledged it was reading academic books. I don't know if that was academic, but Percy, but it could have been. And reading those kinds of books really encouraged you that you overcame a challenge of being adverse to large books. Like Brothers Karamazov was a big book, and I started on it, and I just finally found I couldn't close it. It mixed religion and a mystery story, kind of a detective story, religion. He's a Christian, the writer. So, thank you for sharing that. We have a few minutes. If you would turn to Walden in the chapter called Reading, you have some questions. If you would get those out.
As I shake my head.
It's okay.
No, but you're not exactly.
That's because you're not good. Like to read up at coffee.
Yes, that was.
It's different. Usually the same rhythm.
We're on page 81. I don't think we started this. So we'll start from the beginning. I'm gonna maybe ask Parker to start for us. Just read a paragraph. I found my list, including on there, these are recommendations to you. Killer Angels about Gettysburg, Paradise Lost. Then if you're interested in the Civil War, Shelby Foote wrote 3 volumes called The Civil War, and it reads like a novel. And so I would recommend any of those books.
What?
All right, so would you start, Parker? We'll go down the row and try to read most of this in class. I won't see it again. Page 81, reading.
With a little more deliberation and choice of their pursuits, all men would perhaps become essentially students and observers, for certainly their nature and destiny are interesting to all alike. And accumulating property for ourselves or our posterity, and founding a family or state, or acquiring fame, even we are mortal. But in dealing with truth, we are immortal, and need fear no change nor accident. The oldest Egyptian or Hindu philosopher raised a corner of the veil from the statue of the divinity, and still the trembling robe remains raised, and I gaze upon as fresh a glory as he did, since it was I in him that was then so bold, and it is he in me that now reviews the vision. No dust has settled on that robe. No time has elapsed since that divinity was revealed. That time which we really improve, or which is improbable, is neither past, present, nor future.
These are your books. We're not gonna read a lot from, but you can keep the book. I hope you'll read it. Maybe this will be in your list. But in dealing, it's 4 or 5 lines down. In dealing with truth, we are immortal, and no fear, and fear no change nor accident. So when you're dealing with truth, you're dealing with immortality. Remember, Jesus called himself the way, the truth, and the light. And remember, Keats talked about beauty and truth. Beauty is truth, truth is beauty. It's all that matters. So think about it. Truth never ends. If it's true, it never ends. If it ends, then it was not true. So truth never ends. That's immortal in a sense. Lydia. My residence.
Okay. My residence was more favorable, not only to thought, but to serious reading than a university. And though I was beyond the range of ordinary circulating library, I had more than ever come within the influence of those books which circulate around the world, whose sentences were first written on bark and now merely copied from time to time onto linen paper. Says the poet Mir Kamar Uddin Mas, being seated to run through the region of the spiritual world, I have had this advantage in books. To be intoxicated by a single glass of wine, I have experienced this pleasure when I have drunk the liquor of the esoteric doctors. I kept Homer's Iliad on my table through the summer, though I looked at his pages only now and then. Incessant labor with my hands at first, for I had my house to finish and my beans to hoe at the same time, made more study impossible. Yet I sustained myself by a prospect of such reading in the future. I read 1 or 2 shallow books of travel in the intervals of my work, till that employment made me ashamed of myself, and I asked where it was in that I lived.
And Clayton, you don't have to read the whole thing. Just read maybe half of it and demonstrate and finish.
The student may read Homer or
Aeschylus. Aeschylus.
Aeschylus, in the Greek without danger of dissipation or looking seem as celerity, and the letter in which we are printed are as rare and curious as ever. It is worth the expense of youthful days and costly hours if you learn only some words of an ancient language, which are raised out of the trivialness of the street to be perpetual suggestions and provocations. It is not in vain that the farmer remembers and repeats the few Latin words which he has heard. Men sometimes speak as if they study of the classics would at length make way for more modern and practical studies. But the adventurous student will always study classics in whatever language that may be written and however ancient they may be.
For what are the classics but the noblest recorded thoughts of man?
Would you mind pausing, because that's the answer to that first question, if you have do you have questions?
No.
Okay, sorry, you can underline it, I'll give you the question.
We didn't say that.
You saw nothing.
Yeah, that was funny. I just see that thing get launched on my what?
What are these do, Mr. Powell?
When we finish them, we're just gonna read together for a lot of this. All right, so the answer to the first question is what is a classic? What is a classic? She just read it. Did you hear that? The noblest recorded thoughts of man. And since we've paused, did you hear this? I love this. The first statement. It says, the student may read Homer or Aeschylus in the Greek without danger of dissipation or luxuriousness, but it implies that he is in some measure emulates their heroes. In other words, he's going to talk about this later. The classics require a greater effort on your part, and therefore, you are becoming a better person just for that. He talks elsewhere about the value of hard work and effort. You don't really learn anything unless there's some hard work or focus or concentration on it. I mean, there's some things you learn that are easy, but the really valuable things come at a price. So he just said it's the noblest recorded thoughts of man. And he points out, I don't know any Latin, really. I've picked up. He says, it is worth the expense of youthful days and costly hours if you learn only some words of an ancient language, which are raised out of the trivialness of the street to be perpetual suggestions and provocations. It seems like that great language ennobles you. That's kind of his argument. I would agree with it. Noble things make you more noble. Keep reading.
They're the only oracles which are not decayed, and there are such answers to the most modern inquiry in them as Delphi or the Gonad never gave. We might as well omit to study nature because she is old. To read well, that is, to read true books in a true spirit, is a noble exercise, and one that will task the reader more than any exercise which the customs of the day esteem. It requires a training such as the athletes underwent, the steady intention almost of the whole lives of the subject. Books must read as deliberately and reservedly as they were written.
Underline that. Books must be read as deliberately and reservedly as they were written. The greater the book, the more effort you have to put into understanding it. That's why I think reading Brother Karamazov, it made me a better person just persevering through it until I realized I liked it. And then I didn't have to be coached to read anymore. I read it because I liked it, but I had to surrender to it. I had to submit to it. I had to put an effort into it. And anything that does that is usually good for you. That's what he argues. Michelle.
It is not enough even to be able to speak the language of that nation by which they are written, for there is a memorable interval between the spoken and the written language, the language heard and the language our father tongue, a reserved and select expression, too significant to be heard by the ear, which we must be born again in order to speak. The crowds of men who merely spoke the Greek and Latin tongues in the Middle Ages were not entitled by the accident of birth to read the works of genius written in those languages. For these were not written in that Greek or Latin which they knew, but in the select languages of literature. They had not learned the nobler dialects of Greece and Rome, but the very materials on which they were written were waste paper to them, and they prized instead a cheap contemporary literature. But when the several nations of Europe had acquired distinct rude written languages of their own, sufficient for the purposes of their rising literatures, then first learning revived, and scholars were enabled to discern from that remoteness the treasures of antiquity. But the Roman and Grecian multitude could not hear, after the last of ages, a few scholars dead, and a few scholars only are still reading.
We're gonna read one more, maybe David can read the next one, but really answers, well, we've answered two, but three. He thinks written language is superior to spoken language, and he makes an argument for that, particularly here, so, yeah.
I'm sorry, what is the second one?
Yeah, would you read it? Read it out loud, the
What
question.
Sorry, what argument does he use with those who say they don't study the classics because they're too old?
Well, he uses an analogy. He says we might as well say we shouldn't study nature because it's too old. Of course, that's not a reason not to study nature at all. It would not be a reason not to study the classics.
Can you say that again?
Yeah, he says that we might as well say we shouldn't study nature because nature is old. And that would be an absurd thing. Of course we study nature. It's been around a long time, but we still study it. And if you said that about written language, books, classics, Homer doesn't have anything to teach us, or Virgil. Yeah.
Well, couldn't you say that nature is relevant today because we use it, but Homer's stuff isn't?
Homer is what?
Homer's and like old literature isn't necessarily relevant today, but nature is.
Well, I think his argument is, and the reason it stayed around for, what, 2,000 plus years, 2,000, because it would be relevant. There are things in Homer that are relevant. It's not the Greek gods and that sort of thing. It's the adventure, it's the spirit, it's the language. Those things, he would argue, are, in fact, the older that proves their relevance because we're still reading them, you know. Some of the books that I remember there was a book, sort of when I was in college, but it was about rabbits. You know, it was a really big hit. It was like an allegory. Can't remember the name of it, but it's almost coming to me. But I never read it, and I've never regretted not reading it. No one talks about it. It's not considered. So I think that is the way with bestsellers. They don't last very long. So David.
However much we may admire the orator's occasional bursts of eloquence, the noblest written words are commonly as far behind or above the fleeting spoken language as the firmament which with its stars is behind the clouds. There are the stars, and they who may read them. The astronomers forever comment on and observe them. They are not exhalations like our daily colloquies and vaporous breaths. What is called eloquence in the form is commonly found to be rhetoric in the study. The orator yields to the inspiration of the transient occasion, speaks to the mob before him, to those who can hear him. But the writer, whose more equable life in his occasion, and who would be distracted by the event and the crowd which inspired the orator, speaks to the intellect and the heart of mankind, to all in any age who can understand.
So we'll finish with this. Why does he say, what's one of his arguments that written language is superior to spoken language? Yeah, Clay.
Oh, well, you want me to pick from that one, or can I go to one earlier?
Yeah, or anywhere.
I said, the other is the maturity and experience of that. If that is our mother tongue, this is our father tongue, a reserved and select expression, too significant to be heard by the ear, which we must be born again in order to speak.
I like that. He kind of repeats that idea that, yeah. And what are the dynamics of the speaker that he has to contend with, that the writer doesn't have to contend with? What is the speaker contending with? The audience. And he might be swayed in what he says by your reaction. You think that's funny, I'll say something else that's funny. If you seem to be listening to this, I might speak to what I see you interested in. The writer doesn't worry about that, because he doesn't hear or see the audience. He writes what's on his heart to your heart. He'll never see you, but he's speaking to something in someone invisible and something that's invisible. Anyway, those are his arguments. Have a great Thanksgiving. Don't forget to keep reading the book, other book.
We have to answer these questions.
No, we'll finish those when